At a small bakery, a young black woman had been working herself to exhaustion for 4 months, saving every dollar she could just to buy a birthday cake for her sick mother. As she was about to end her shift, an elderly couple soaked shivering and starving walked in, asking for food, only to be turned away by everyone. Before she could react, the old woman suddenly collapsed from hunger. Without thinking, Aaliyah rushed to help her and offered the very cake she had saved for her mother. What she didn't know was that this single act of kindness would soon lead her into a life she never dared to dream of. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The alarm hadn't gone off yet, but Aaliyah Carter was already awake. She always was. In the gray light filtering through the thin curtains of her basement apartment, she could make out the cracks in the ceiling, the same ones she'd been staring at for the past 4 years. She'd memorized every line, every split in the plaster. Sometimes, on her worst nights, she'd count them like sheep. 47 major cracks, countless smaller ones branching off like veins. 22 years old, and this was her life. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake the springs in her second-hand mattress. The metal frame groaned anyway it always did. The room was barely 10 by 12 feet. Bed pushed against one wall. Small dresser with 3 drawers that stuck when you pulled them. A plastic chair she'd found on the curb last summer, one leg shorter than the others, propped up with folded cardboard. On the dresser sat a white envelope with "College Fund" written in her careful handwriting. She'd used a blue pen pressing hard so the letters would stand out, like that would make the dream more real. Aaliyah pulled on her work clothes, black pants, with a small tear near the pocket that she'd sewn up 3 times now. The thread was starting to fray again. She'd have to fix it this weekend. The gray sweater had seen better days, pilling at the elbows, but it was warm, and it was clean, and that was what mattered. She grabbed her wallet from the nightstand and opened it. $12.35, 3 5s, 2 1s a quarter, and a dime. The bus was $3.50 each way, $7 round trip. That left $5.35 for the week. She had ramen at home. She had rice. She could make it work. But $7 was $7. Aaliyah closed the wallet and slipped it into her pocket. The bus could wait. Her legs worked just fine. They'd work for the 43-minute walk to Sweet Haven Bakery. They'd been working for 4 years now. Before leaving, she stopped at her mother's door. She stood there for a moment listening. Through the gap, she could hear the shallow, labored breathing. Some nights, it kept her awake, that sound. The rattle in her mother's chest. The pauses between breaths that went on too long. Other nights, she was grateful for it. At least it meant her mother was still here. Still fighting. Aaliyah pushed the door open quietly. Linda Carter lay in the narrow bed, her face pale against the pillow. At 53, she looked 70. Kidney failure had a way of stealing more than just health. It took vitality, color, hope. Her mother's hair, once thick and dark, had gone thin and gray. Her skin had that yellowish tint that came from toxins the kidneys couldn't filter anymore. "Mom," Aaliyah whispered, "you awake?" A slight movement. Her mother's eyes opened halfway unfocused at first, then finding Aaliyah's face. Baby." Linda's voice was barely there, cracked and dry. "What time is it?" "Early, just after 5. I'm heading to work." "So early." "I know." Aaliyah moved to the bedside. She'd made tea earlier, the cheapest kind, from the dollar store, 48 bags for $2, and now she placed the cup on the bedside table next to the bottles of medication they could barely afford. "Drink this when you can. Okay, I'll be back around 6. You work too much, baby." Her mother's hand reached out, trembling slightly. Aaliyah took it, feeling how thin it had become. She could feel every bone. "You're just a child." "I'm 22, Mom, not a child." "You'll always be my child." Linda squeezed her hand weakly. "You don't have to do all this. We could—" "We're not talking about that." Aaliyah kept her voice gentle but firm. They'd had this conversation before. Her mother wanted to stop treatment, wanted Aaliyah to save the money to go to school to live her life. But Aaliyah couldn't, wouldn't. "You're going to get better. You're going to get a kidney, and I'm going to take care of you until then." "Stubborn girl." "I learned from the best." Aaliyah smiled and kissed her mother's forehead. The skin was cool and papery. "Rest, Mom. Just rest. I'll call you on my break." She left before the tears could come. She'd learned that trick over the years, leave fast cry later. Never let her mother see the fear. The walk to Sweet Haven Bakery took 43 minutes. Aaliyah knew because she'd timed it the first week back. When she'd started working there 2 years ago, she'd walked it with her phone out, checking the minutes, trying to figure out if the money saved was worth the blisters, the aching feet, the way her toes went numb in winter. It was. Every dollar counted. The streets of Rochester, New York were already busy with early morning traffic. Cars rushing past splashing slush from last night's snow. People in warm coats hurrying to jobs, to lives that didn't involve choosing between bus fare and food. December had arrived with a vengeance this year, the kind of cold that cut through cheap coats and settled in your bones. Aaliyah kept her head down and kept walking her breath, making clouds in the freezing air. She'd learned long ago that feeling sorry for yourself didn't change anything, didn't pay bills, didn't cure kidney failure, didn't turn back time. 4 years. That's how long it had been since everything fell apart. She remembered the day she got her acceptance letter to Monroe Community College. She'd screamed so loud the neighbors complained Mrs. Patterson upstairs had banged on the floor with her broom. Her mother had cried the good kind of tears, the kind that came from joy so big you couldn't hold it in. They'd celebrated with pizza from Angelo's down the street, splurging on extra cheese and pepperoni, even though they really couldn't afford it. "My daughter's going to college," her mother had said that night, holding the acceptance letter like it was made of gold. She'd read it over and over, touching the school's seal with her fingertips. "My baby's going to have a better life than I did, a real career, a future." That was April. By June, everything had changed. The diagnosis came fast. Her mother had been tired, that was all. Tired and a little swollen. Probably just working too hard, they'd both said. But when Linda finally went to the emergency room because she couldn't catch her breath, the doctors had delivered the news like a bomb: end-stage renal failure, both kidneys. She needed dialysis immediately. She needed a transplant. She needed things that cost more money than Aaliyah had ever seen in her life. The choice had been simple, impossible but simple: college or her mother's life. Aaliyah had withdrawn her acceptance in July. By August, she was working 2 jobs. She'd worked every job she could find over these 4 years. Hotel housekeeper, first $8 an hour, cleaning rooms where people left their trash like she was invisible. She'd scrubbed toilets, changed sheets stained with things she didn't want to think about, found half-eaten room service meals that cost more than she made in a day. The guests never looked at her. She'd been a ghost in a gray uniform. Then waitress at an all-night diner, $7.50 plus tips, though the tips were usually just loose change left behind, sometimes not even that. Graveyard shift serving truckers and drunks and insomniacs. Her feet had ached so bad after those shifts she could barely walk home. But the manager let her take home food sometimes, the stuff that was going to be thrown out anyway, and that saved money. Overnight shifts at the 7-Eleven where drunk college kids would mock her name tag and leave messes she had to clean. "Aaliyah, what kind of name is that?" They'd slur, laughing. She'd smile and ring up their beer and cigarettes and not say what she was thinking. She'd mop up their spills and restock the shelves they'd destroyed and go home smelling like hot dogs and disinfectant. Every paycheck, no matter how small, she'd take whatever was left after rent and medicine and food and put it in that white envelope. $5 here, $10 there. Sometimes just coins, quarters, and dimes saved from not buying a soda from walking instead of taking the bus from skipping lunch. Her friends from high school had all gone off to college. Their social media was full of dorm rooms decorated with fairy lights, football games with painted faces, late-night study sessions that looked more like parties, photos with captions like "Best Years of Our Lives" and "College Squad" and "Making Memories." Aaliyah had unfollowed most of them. Not out of bitterness, at least she told herself that. She just couldn't bear to watch. Couldn't see their bright futures while hers had been put on hold indefinitely. Some of them had reached out at first. "Hey girl, long time, want to grab coffee and catch up?" But she'd made excuses. She was working. She was busy. She was tired. Eventually, they stopped asking. It was easier that way. Easier than explaining that she couldn't afford coffee out. Easier than sitting across from them while they talked about classes and professors and campus drama, while she had nothing to share but stories about cleaning other people's messes. By the time she reached Sweet Haven, her fingers were numb despite her gloves. The gloves were cheap from the dollar store with holes starting in the fingertips. She pushed through the door, grateful for the warmth, for the smell of sugar and yeast and coffee. "You're late," said Jessica, the other morning shift worker, without looking up from her phone. Aaliyah glanced at the clock on the wall. 5:58 a.m. Her shift started at 6. "Sorry," she said anyway. It was easier than arguing, easier than explaining she'd walked 43 minutes in the freezing cold. Jessica wouldn't understand. Jessica drove a car her parents had bought her, lived in an apartment her parents helped pay for, worked here because she was saving for a trip to Europe. Sweet Haven was a small bakery tucked into a corner of a strip mall between a laundromat and a cell phone repair shop. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was a kind woman in her 60s who'd immigrated from Taiwan 30 years ago. She ran the place with her husband, both of them working 14-hour days, barely making enough to keep the lights on. But Mrs. Chen had hired Aaliyah 2 years ago when no one else would. Aaliyah had been desperate, then fired from the hotel for missing too many shifts when her mother had been hospitalized. She'd walked into Sweet Haven with no experience, no references, just the honest truth. "I need a job. I'll work hard. Please." Mrs. Chen had looked at her for a long moment. Then she'd said, "You start tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't be late." Aaliyah had never been late, not once in 2 years. The morning passed in its usual blur. Aaliyah wiped down tables, refilled the pastry display case with croissants and Danish and cookies-made coffee for the early morning crowd. Contractors getting breakfast before job sites, office workers grabbing something quick before work. Students from the community college, the one Aaliyah should have been attending, studying over lattes they bought with their parents' money. She smiled at everyone, took their orders, made their change, wished them a good day. Jessica spent most of her time on her phone, occasionally complaining about her boyfriend, or her parents, or the weather. "I'm so over winter," she said, around 10, scrolling through Instagram. "My parents said if I save enough, they'll help pay for Cancun in March. I need a beach so bad." Aaliyah nodded, scrubbing at a stubborn coffee stain on the counter. "What about you?" Jessica asked, not really interested. "You doing anything for the holidays?" "Just spending time with my mom." "That's it, God, that's depressing." Aaliyah didn't respond. She moved to restock the napkin dispensers. Around noon, during a lull, Aaliyah found herself standing in front of the display case. There, on the second shelf, was a small mousse cake, 6 inches across maybe. Chocolate and vanilla swirl the colors marbled together in perfect spirals, topped with a delicate sugar rose that must have taken Mrs. Chen hours to make. The price tag read $24.99. Aaliyah stared at it. She'd been staring at it for weeks now. "Still staring at that thing," Jessica said, appearing behind her. "Just buy it already. It's not that expensive." "I will," Aaliyah said quietly. "Soon." "For what, you got a hot date or something?" Jessica laughed at her own joke. "It's for my mom. Her birthday's coming up, December 20th. Jessica snorted. $25 for a cake. My mom would kill me. She'd be like, "That's gas money," or "That's half the phone bill." She'd make me take it back. Aaliyah didn't respond. She just kept looking at the cake, at the perfect sugar rose, at the way the chocolate and vanilla swirled together. She'd been saving for 4 months. Not the same way she saved for college. This was different. This was slower, harder, more deliberate. The college fund envelope had been emptied again 3 months ago. Her mother had needed an emergency dialysis session, and the hospital wanted payment up front. Aaliyah had taken every dollar she'd saved, 2 years of sacrifice, and handed it over. Watched 2 years of her future disappear in a single transaction. So this time she'd been more careful, more secretive. 50 cents from not buying a soda at work. $1 from skipping lunch and eating the free bread Mrs. Chen let employees have. $2 from walking instead of taking the bus on days when the weather wasn't too bad. Quarters found in the washing machine at the laundromat. Dimes from the cup holder in the car she sometimes borrowed from her neighbor. She'd hidden the money in different places this time, afraid to keep it all in one spot. A few dollars in her work locker tucked inside an old sweater. Some change in an old shoebox under her bed. Quarters in a Ziploc bag taped to the back of her dresser drawer. $5 bills folded tiny and slipped inside the pages of the one book she owned, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird from high school. $24.99, plus tax that made it about $27. 4 months of sacrifice for one small cake. But her mother's birthday was tomorrow, and Aaliyah hadn't been able to get her a real present in years. Not since before the diagnosis. Every year, it was the same. "Sorry, Mom, money's tight this year, but I made you dinner." The dinner was usually pasta with jarred sauce, maybe some frozen vegetables if they were on sale. This year would be different. This year her mother would have a real birthday cake, the kind with frosting roses and layers and everything beautiful. Earth to Aaliyah. Jessica waved her hand. Customer. Aaliyah turned. An elderly man stood at the counter waiting patiently. Sorry, sir. What can I get you? The afternoon crawled by. By 3 o'clock, when her shift was supposed to end, Aaliyah was exhausted. Her feet ached. Her back hurt from bending over to clean tables. But when Mrs. Chen emerged from the back office, Aaliyah straightened up, ready for whatever came next. Aaliyah, can you stay for the evening shift? Daniel called in sick. Of course, Aaliyah said without hesitation. More hours meant more money. Every extra dollar helped. I'll pay you time and a half. Aaliyah's heart jumped. Time and a half. She did the quick math in her head. If she worked until 9, that was 6 extra hours. At time and a half, that was. She'd have enough. Finally, she'd have enough to buy the cake and still have a few dollars left over for the week. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Really, thank you so much. The older woman studied her for a moment, her eyes kind but sad. You work too hard, sweetie. You're so young. When do you have fun? When do you see friends? I have fun. Aaliyah lied with a practiced smile. I'm fine, really. Mrs. Chen didn't look convinced, but she patted Aaliyah's shoulder anyway. You're a good girl. Your mother is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. Mrs. Chen's eyes grew sadder. She knew about Linda's condition. Everyone who worked at Sweet Haven knew. Mrs. Chen had even visited once bringing soup and bread. How is she doing? She's stable, waiting for a kidney. The doctors say it could be months or years. I pray for her, Mrs. Chen said softly. Every day I pray. Thank you. Aaliyah's throat was tight. Mrs. Chen squeezed her shoulder once more and disappeared back into the office. The evening shift was quieter than the morning. Fewer customers, more time to think. Aaliyah restocked shelves, cleaned the coffee machines, wiped down every surface until it gleamed. Jessica had left at 3 without saying goodbye, leaving behind a half-empty cup of coffee and crumbs on the employee table in the back. By 7 o'clock, the bakery was empty except for Aaliyah. She was wiping down the counter when Mrs. Chen came out again, this time wearing her coat. I'm heading home, she said, putting on her gloves. You close up at 9, okay? And Aaliyah, she pulled an envelope from her purse. Your paycheck. I included the overtime from last week and today's time and a half. Aaliyah took it with both hands, careful not to crease it. Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for everything. You're a good worker. Best I've ever had. Mrs. Chen smiled. Lock up tight, okay? And get home safe. After Mrs. Chen left, Aaliyah stood alone in the quiet bakery. She held the envelope against her chest for a moment, not opening it yet. She already knew what it would say. It always did. After taxes, probably around $230 for 2 weeks of work. Plus today's time and a half, maybe another $40. $270 total. Rent was $200 a month for their basement apartment. That left $70. Her mother's medications cost $40 every 2 weeks, even with the assistance program. That left $30. Food for 2 people trying to stretch every dollar, maybe $40 for 2 weeks, if they were careful, if they bought rice and beans and pasta and nothing fancy. That left them $10 short. But that was normal. They were always short. Aaliyah would figure it out. She always did. Maybe she'd pick up another shift. Maybe she'd skip lunch more often. Maybe she'd walk everywhere and save the bus money. The math was always brutal, but tonight she didn't want to think about it. Tonight she wanted to think about the cake. Aaliyah walked over to the display case and looked at the mousse cake again. Tomorrow was December 19th. Her mother's birthday was the day after. 4 months of saving. 4 months of choosing between a warm meal and a few extra dollars. 4 months of walking 43 minutes in the freezing cold. 4 months of hiding coins and dollar bills in secret places. All for this one small cake. Tomorrow morning, she'd come in early before her shift started. She'd ask Mrs. Chen to write, "Happy Birthday, Mom," in pretty frosting letters on the top. She'd ask for it to be put in one of the nice boxes, the white ones with the clear window, so you could see the cake inside. She'd carry it home, carefully cradling it like a newborn, maybe even splurging $3.50 on the bus so it wouldn't get ruined. She'd walk if she had to, but slowly, so carefully keeping it level. And when she got home, she'd light a candle, just one, because birthday candles were expensive and unnecessary. She'd wake her mother up gently. She'd say, "Happy birthday, Mom. I got you something special this year." And her mother would cry. She always cried on her birthday now, ever since getting sick. But maybe this year they'd be happy tears. Maybe this year, for just one moment, they could both pretend things were normal. That they were just a mother and daughter celebrating a birthday with cake like millions of other families did every day without thinking about it. Aaliyah smiled to herself, imagining it. Small victories. That's all she had. That's all she needed. At 8:47 p.m., 13 minutes before closing, the door chimed. Aaliyah looked up from sweeping the floor, already preparing her polite, "We're about to close" speech. The words died in her throat. An elderly couple stood in the doorway, and everything about them was wrong. The man was tall and thin, maybe in his 70s, wearing a coat that looked like it had survived too many winters. The fabric was worn through, in places patched badly. The color faded from black to gray. His face was weathered, deeply lined, his gray hair uncombed and wild. His hands, gripping the door, were gnarled and shaking. He held the door open for his wife, who moved like every step hurt. The woman was small and frail, hunched over, clutching her husband's arm with both hands just to stay upright. Her coat was just as bad as his, thin, threadbare with buttons missing. Her face was so pale it was almost gray. Her eyes were red-rimmed and unfocused. She looked like she might collapse at any moment. They were both soaked. The snow had turned to freezing rain sometime in the evening, and they looked like they'd been walking in it for hours. Water dripped from their coats onto the floor. The woman was shivering so hard Aaliyah could see it from across the room. "Please," the man said, his voice rough and desperate. "Please, my wife. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. Do you have anything at all? Even scraps, even garbage, please." Aaliyah's grip tightened on the broom. Her heart was suddenly pounding. Let me see what—" "We're closed," Jessica's voice cut through the air. She'd been in the back changing out of her work clothes, and now she marched out wearing her regular jacket, her purse already slung over her shoulder. "Can't you people read the sign? We close at 9? "Please," the man said again. He looked like begging was killing him, like every word cost him something. "My wife is sick. She needs food. I can work. I can wash dishes. I can sweep. I can do anything you need. Just please give her something to eat." "We don't do charity here," Jessica said flatly, her voice cold. She looked at Aaliyah. "Tell them we're closed." Aaliyah looked at the couple. The woman's eyes were half closed now, her breathing shallow and rapid. She swayed slightly even while holding her husband's arm. "Jessica, maybe we could—" "No, Mrs. Chen doesn't let us give away food. You know that. Inventory has to match sales." Jessica grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "I'm leaving. Lock up in 10 minutes like you're supposed to." She pushed past the elderly couple without a second glance, disappearing into the parking lot. The silence that followed was heavy. The man's shoulders sagged. His whole body seemed to deflate. "I'm sorry. We shouldn't have bothered you. We'll go." "Wait," Aaliyah said. The word came out before she could think about it. They both looked at her, the man with desperate hope, the woman with eyes that barely seemed to see her. Aaliyah's mind raced. There were day-old pastries in the back. Mrs. Chen usually let her take those home, one of the small perks of the job. But Jessica had already claimed them earlier, saying they were for her boyfriend, even though Aaliyah suspected she'd just throw them away. She did that sometimes. The register had $37 in it, money that had to be deposited tomorrow morning. Mrs. Chen counted it every day, matched it against the sales receipts. Aaliyah couldn't touch that. She'd be fired. Her own paycheck was in her pocket. $270. But that was for rent, for medicine, for food, for the cake. The thought hit her like ice water. The cake, her mother's birthday cake, $24.99 plus tax. $27 and change. She looked at the display case. The mousse cake sat there on the second shelf, perfect and beautiful with its delicate sugar rose. 4 months of saving. 4 months of sacrifice. Then she looked at the woman again. Eleanor, the man had called her. Eleanor's face was the color of old newspaper. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her breathing was getting worse, more labored. "Ma'am," Aaliyah said softly, "when was the last time you ate?" The woman tried to answer, but no sound came out. 3 days, the man said quietly, his voice cracked. We lost our place. The apartment. Everything happened so fast. The rent went up $300 and we couldn't afford it. We've been staying in my car, but then the car broke down 2 days ago and we couldn't fix it. We've been walking, looking for shelters, but they're all full. And Eleanor has diabetes. She needs to eat regularly, or his voice broke entirely. Aaliyah felt something twist in her chest. She thought about her mother lying in that narrow bed, waiting for a kidney getting weaker every day. She thought about how terrified she was every time she left for work, afraid she'd come home to find her mother had died alone. She thought about what she'd do if someone found her mother on the street, hungry and sick. What she'd hoped they would do. The woman stumbled, her knees buckled. Her husband caught her, but barely. He was too frail himself, and they both nearly went down. "Eleanor," he said urgently, his voice rising in panic. "Eleanor, stay with me, please. Stay with me." The woman's eyes rolled back. Her weight went limp in her husband's arms. "No, no, no," the man was saying. "Please, Eleanor, please." Aaliyah moved without thinking. She dropped the broom and ran to help, catching the woman's other arm just as she started to slide to the floor. "Help me get her to a chair," Aaliyah said. Together she and the man half-carried, half-dragged Eleanor to the nearest table and lowered her into a chair. The woman's head lolled to the side. Her breathing was fast and shallow, her chest barely moving. "Eleanor," the man was saying, patting her face gently. "Come on, honey. Open your eyes. Please." Aaliyah stared at them. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. This woman was dying. Right here, right now, this woman was dying. And Aaliyah had a choice. She could call an ambulance. She should call an ambulance, but ambulances cost money. If this couple couldn't afford rent, they definitely couldn't afford an ambulance. The hospital would stabilize Eleanor, then discharge her back to the street. Or Aaliyah could do something right now. Something small but immediate. She looked at the display case again, at the mousse cake. Her mother's birthday was tomorrow, but this woman might not have a tomorrow. Aaliyah's hands were shaking as she walked to the display case. She opened the glass door. It made a soft swoosh sound that seemed too loud in the quiet bakery, and she reached for the cake. Her fingers touched the plate. It was cold. 4 months, her mind screamed. 4 months of saving. Your mother's birthday. The one thing, the only thing you were going to be able to give her. But Eleanor's breathing was getting worse. Ragged. Desperate. Aaliyah picked up the cake. It felt heavier than it should. She carried it to the table like she was carrying something made of glass, something infinitely fragile. Behind her, the man's voice said, "Miss, we don't have money for—" "I know," Aaliyah said. Her voice sounded strange distant. She set the cake down in front of Eleanor. "It's okay. We can't accept this." "Yes, you can." Aaliyah went to the counter and grabbed a fork and a bottle of water. Her eyes were burning, but she wouldn't cry. Not yet. Not in front of them. She set the fork and water on the table. "Please," she said softly. "Eat." The man stared at the cake, then at Aaliyah. His eyes were filling with tears. "I don't—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Eleanor's eyes had opened again. She was looking at the cake with an expression that made Aaliyah want to break. Disbelief. Desperate hope. Hunger so deep it was painful to see. "Please," Aaliyah said again, "before it's too late." Eleanor reached out with a trembling hand. Her fingers could barely grip the fork. The man had to help her, guiding her hand. She took a bite, and then she started to cry. Not loud sobs, these were quiet tears that rolled down her weathered cheeks as she chewed slowly, carefully, like the cake was the most precious thing she'd ever tasted, like she couldn't believe it was real. The man put his arm around his wife, pulling her close. His own face was wet now. He kept whispering, it's okay, you're okay," like a prayer. Eleanor took another bite, then another. The color was already starting to come back to her face. Not much, but enough. Enough to matter. Aaliyah backed away slowly. I'll get you both some coffee. On the house." She walked to the back room on legs that didn't feel entirely solid. Once she was out of sight, she leaned against the wall and pressed her palms hard against her eyes. That was her mother's birthday cake. 4 months of saving. 4 months of walking in the cold, of skipping lunch, of putting away every spare nickel and dime. Gone. She thought about her mother's face tomorrow when Aaliyah would have to say, "I'm sorry, Mom. I couldn't get you anything this year. I know I said I would, but something came up." Her mother would smile. She'd hug Aaliyah and say it was fine, that just being together was enough, that she didn't need anything fancy. She always said that, but Aaliyah had wanted to give her something. This one small thing. She took a shaky breath and made 2 cups of coffee. Added sugar and cream to both, even though cream was supposed to be for paying customers only. She didn't care. When she came back out, Eleanor had eaten about half the cake. She was sitting up straighter now, her eyes more focused. She was sipping water slowly. Thomas, the man, had introduced himself while Aaliyah was gone, was watching his wife like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Thank you," he said when Aaliyah set down the coffee. His voice was thick with emotion. "I don't know how to. I can never. Thank you." "It's okay," Aaliyah said. Her own voice was unsteady. "No." Thomas looked at her directly. His eyes were a pale blue, sharp despite his age. "It's not just okay. What you did, most people wouldn't have. Most people would have turned us away, or called the police, or—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "That cake. It meant something to you, didn't it?" Aaliyah hesitated. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter. Tell me." She looked down at her hands. "It was for my mom's birthday. Tomorrow." Thomas closed his eyes. The pain on his face was real. "Oh, God. It's fine. Really. My mom will understand." "How long?" His voice was quiet now. "How long did you save for it?" Aaliyah didn't want to answer, but there was something in his face, genuine remorse, genuine pain that made her tell the truth. 4 months. Eleanor made a small sound. She set down her fork carefully, her hands still shaking. She looked at Aaliyah with eyes that were suddenly very clear, very focused. 4 months, Eleanor whispered. "You saved for 4 months and you gave it to us, to strangers." "You needed it more," Aaliyah said simply. "Why?" Thomas asked. "Why would you do that? You don't know us. We could be anyone. We could be—" "Does it matter?" Aaliyah's voice cracked. "Your people. You were hungry. Your wife was— she was dying. I couldn't just—" She stopped, wiping at her eyes angrily. "I'm sorry. I should finish closing up. You can stay as long as you need." She turned away before they could see her cry properly. At the counter, she busied herself with the register, counting the same $37 3 times, even though she already knew what it was. Anything to avoid looking at the table where 2 strangers were eating her mother's birthday cake. Behind her, she could hear them talking in low voices. Thomas's deep murmur reassuring and gentle. Eleanor's weak responses getting stronger with each minute. The soft clink of the fork against the plate. Aaliyah forced herself to focus on closing, wiping down the espresso machine, checking that all the pastries were put away, making sure the doors to the display cases were locked. Normal things, routine things, things that didn't require thinking. Finally, footsteps approached. "Miss?" Thomas said. Aaliyah wiped her eyes quickly and turned. "Yes." Thomas held out a napkin. On it, he'd written something in shaky handwriting. A phone number, a name, Thomas and Eleanor Kensington. "If you ever need anything," he said. "Anything at all, please call this number." "I don't need—" "Please." His voice was intense now. "You gave more than you think you did. More than food. More than a cake." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You gave dignity. You gave hope. You reminded us that kindness still exists in this world. And those are things most people forget about when they're helping the homeless." Aaliyah took the napkin, not sure what to say. Eleanor had stood up now, leaning heavily on her husband, but she looked so much better than when she'd arrived. Color in her cheeks, life in her eyes. She reached out and took Aaliyah's hand. Her grip was weak, but warm. "Bless you, child," she said. Her voice was still rough, but stronger. "I don't believe in coincidences. You were meant to be here tonight. We were meant to find you." "I don't understand what you mean." "You will," Thomas said. He helped Eleanor into her coat. She'd taken it off while eating, and now Aaliyah could see how thin she was under it, how the clothes hung on her frame. "What's your name?" "Aaliyah. Aaliyah Carter." "Aaliyah." He said it slowly, carefully, like he was memorizing every syllable. "Remember what I said. If you ever need anything, anything at all." He helped Eleanor to the door. They moved slowly, but Eleanor was walking on her own now, just using Thomas for balance instead of complete support. At the door, Thomas turned back one more time. "The world needs more people like you," he said quietly. "Don't let it make you hard. Don't let it take that away from you." Then they were gone, disappearing into the cold December night. Aaliyah stood alone in the empty bakery. The half-eaten cake sat on the table, a witness to what had just happened. The napkin with the phone number was in her hand, the ink already starting to smudge from her sweaty palm. She looked at it for a long moment. Thomas and Eleanor Kensington. The name didn't mean anything to her. Just 2 more people struggling to survive in a world that didn't care about them. She folded the napkin carefully and put it in her pocket next to her paycheck. Then she went back to closing up, washed the plate and fork, threw away the rest of the cake. It couldn't be sold now, and she couldn't bear to take it home. Locked the display cases, counted the register one final time, $37, exactly as it should be. At exactly 9 o'clock, Aaliyah turned off the lights, locked the door, and started the long walk home. The freezing rain had stopped, but the temperature had dropped. The sidewalks were starting to ice over. Aaliyah walked carefully, her hands shoved deep in her pockets, her mind a mess of thoughts she couldn't quite sort through. Tomorrow was her mother's birthday, and she had nothing to give her. No cake, no present, nothing but herself, and a half-truth about where the money had gone. But somewhere in Rochester tonight, an elderly woman named Eleanor was alive because Aaliyah had made a choice, had given up something precious for someone who needed it more. Was that enough? Would that be enough? Aaliyah didn't know. She just kept walking, one foot in front of the other toward home. The apartment was dark when she got back. For a terrifying moment, the same terrifying moment she had every time she came home to silence, Aaliyah thought her mother had been taken to the hospital again. But then she heard it. The familiar labored breathing from the bedroom. The soft wheeze. The pause between inhale and exhale that always lasted a heartbeat too long. Aaliyah exhaled slowly, her whole body sagging with relief. She set down her bag and toed off her shoes, her feet aching from the long day. She went to check on her mother, moving quietly through the dark apartment. In the bedroom, Linda was asleep. The light from the street lamp outside cast a yellow glow through the thin curtains, enough to see by. Her mother's chest rose and fell in that shallow way that always made Aaliyah nervous. The medical equipment the hospital had sent home, the portable oxygen tank, the blood pressure monitor, a small box of emergency supplies, sat beside the bed like silent sentinels. Aaliyah pulled the blanket up higher, tucking it around her mother's thin shoulders. Linda stirred slightly, but didn't wake. "Happy early birthday, Mom," Aaliyah whispered, bending down to kiss her forehead. The skin was cool and papery under her lips. "I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't. I'm sorry." She couldn't finish. What was she even apologizing for? In her own room, Aaliyah sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the napkin from her pocket. The phone number stared back at her, written in that shaky handwriting. Below it, "Thomas and Eleanor Kensington, you gave us everything. Let us return the favor." Kensington. She turned the name over in her mind, trying to remember if she'd heard it before. It sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Probably just a common name. Aaliyah tucked the napkin into her dresser drawer between two folded t-shirts and changed for bed. She was so tired she could barely think, exhausted down to her bones. Tomorrow was her mother's birthday, and she'd have to figure out something to make it special. Maybe she could cook a nice dinner with what they had in the pantry. Maybe she could borrow the neighbor's laptop and find a movie they could watch together. Something. Anything. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Jessica. "Did those homeless people leave? Make sure they didn't steal anything. Mrs. Chen will flip if stuff is missing." Aaliyah stared at the message. Anger flashed through her, hot and unexpected. Those homeless people had names. They had been desperate. They had needed help. But she didn't respond. She never did when Jessica said things like that. It wasn't worth the fight. She turned off her phone and lay down, staring at the ceiling, at the 47 cracks she'd memorized. 4 months, all gone in one night. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see the cake. She saw Eleanor's face, the way the color had come back to her cheeks, the way her eyes had focused again, had become clear and aware and alive, the way Thomas had held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Sometimes Aaliyah thought the most expensive things in life don't cost money at all. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can give is the thing you can least afford to lose. She fell asleep thinking about that and dreaming of sugar roses. Underscore 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 continuing in next part due to length. The next morning, Aaliyah woke to her mother calling her name. "Aaliyah, honey, are you awake?" There was something in her mother's voice, not panic, but surprise. Excitement, maybe. Aaliyah rushed into her mother's room, her heart already pounding. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay? Do you need—" "I'm fine, baby. I'm fine." Linda was sitting up in bed, actually sitting up, which she hadn't been able to do easily in months. She was smiling, actually smiling, her eyes bright. "Look." She pointed to the doorway. There, sitting just inside the room, was a large wicker basket. It was wrapped in cellophane and tied with a silver bow that caught the morning light. Inside were cakes, cookies, fresh bread still in bags, jars of jam with fancy labels, bottles of juice, fresh fruit that looked like it came from somewhere expensive, and a white card tucked into the front. Aaliyah stared. What? How did this get here? I don't know. I heard a knock on the door about an hour ago, loud enough to wake me up. But by the time I could get myself out of bed and to the door, Linda gestured at the basket. This was here. No one around. Just the basket. Aaliyah picked it up. It was heavy. Really heavy. She carried it to her mother's bed and set it down carefully. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out the card. The handwriting was the same as on the napkin in her drawer. She'd recognize it anywhere now. For Aaliyah and her mother, happy birthday, Linda. Thank you for raising someone who still believes in kindness, even when the world gives her every reason not to. May this birthday be filled with the same sweetness you showed to strangers. Thomas and Eleanor. Aaliyah read it 3 times, 4 times. The words blurred. Who are Thomas and Eleanor? Her mother asked, taking the card from Aaliyah's trembling hands. I met them last night, at work. Aaliyah's voice sounded far away. They needed help. And you helped them. It wasn't a question. Yeah. Linda read the card again, her finger tracing over the words. When she looked up at Aaliyah, her eyes were wet. You gave them food when we don't have much ourselves, didn't you? Aaliyah nodded, not trusting her voice. What did you give them, baby? Aaliyah's throat was so tight she could barely speak. The cake. Your birthday cake. I'd been saving for months, and Her voice broke. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I wanted to get you something nice this year, something special. But they were so hungry. And she was sick. And I thought, come here. Linda held out her arms. Aaliyah collapsed onto the bed, letting her mother hold her while she cried. Linda was so thin now, so weak, but her arms were still strong when they mattered. She stroked Aaliyah's hair and made soft shushing sounds. My beautiful girl, Linda whispered. My kind, beautiful, selfless girl. I wanted to give you a real birthday cake, Aaliyah sobbed. Just once, just 1 year. And you did, baby. You did. No, I didn't. I gave it to strangers. You gave it to people who needed it more than I did. Linda pulled back, holding Aaliyah's face in both hands. You gave it to someone who was dying. You saved a life, Aaliyah. You saved someone's wife, someone's mother maybe, someone's whole world. But it was supposed to be for you. It was for me. Don't you see, every time you choose kindness, every time you help someone, even when it costs you something, that's a gift to me. Because it means I raised you right. It means that even though we've been through hell, even though we've lost so much, you haven't become hard. You haven't become bitter. I wanted you to have a real birthday. Linda smiled through her tears. And now I do. Look at all this. Aaliyah, this is more food than we've had in months. We can eat like kings for weeks. And more importantly, she picked up the card again. Someone saw my daughter's heart and recognized it for what it is. Someone wanted to honor that. That's the best birthday present anyone could give me. They spent the rest of the morning going through the basket. There was so much. Fresh sourdough bread that probably cost $20 a loaf. Strawberry jam with real strawberries, not the overly sweet store brand they usually bought. Chocolate cookies that melted on your tongue. Bottles of real orange juice, the kind that cost $8 at the store. Fresh apples and oranges. A whole pound cake. Muffins. Scones. This must have cost hundreds of dollars, Aaliyah said, pulling out jar after jar. They must be well off, Linda said. Mom, they were homeless. They were wearing rags. They said they'd been sleeping in their car until it broke down. Linda looked at her. Are you sure about that? Aaliyah thought about it, about how Thomas had spoken educated, articulate, about the way they'd held themselves even in desperation, about the careful handwriting on the card. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know anything anymore. They ate fresh bread with strawberry jam for breakfast. Linda cried over how good it tasted. They had real orange juice instead of the powder mix. They split a chocolate cookie. This is the best birthday I've had in years, Linda said, smiling through tears. Maybe the best birthday I've ever had. But something was nagging at Aaliyah. She couldn't shake it. The basket was too much, too expensive, too deliberate. And it had been delivered at dawn. Someone had known exactly where they lived and had come here specifically. She thought about Thomas and Eleanor, about their worn coats and desperate faces. but also about the way Thomas had written on that napkin, precise, careful handwriting, despite his shaking hands. About the way he'd spoken, the vocabulary he'd used. About Eleanor's coat, threadbare, but well-made, the kind that had been expensive once. Who were they really? The question haunted her all day. Even as she and her mother shared the food, even as they watched old movies on the tiny TV, even as Linda dozed off in her chair with a small smile on her face, Aaliyah couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, after her mother was asleep, Aaliyah pulled out the napkin from her drawer. She stared at the phone number. She should throw it away. Whatever this was, Charity pity some kind of weird social experiment. She didn't want it, but she didn't throw it away. She put it back in the drawer and tried to sleep. Underscore, 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 underscore. The answer came 2 days later. Aaliyah was at work restocking the pastry display case during the morning lull when the door chimed. She looked up automatically, her customer service smile already in place. The smile died on her face. Thomas and Eleanor stood in the doorway, but they looked completely different. Thomas wore a charcoal wool coat that looked like it cost more than Aaliyah's yearly rent. Underneath, she could see a dark suit perfectly tailored with a silver tie. His gray hair was neatly combed, styled. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Even his posture had changed. He stood straight now, confident, commanding. Eleanor stood beside him in a long camel coat that screamed money, a silk scarf in cream and gold, leather gloves. Her thin frame was draped in quality fabrics that had been chosen to flatter. Her face was made up subtle, expensive makeup that covered the lines without looking obvious. Diamond earrings caught the light. Behind them stood a man in a black suit, clearly a driver or bodyguard or assistant of some kind. He had the look of someone who was paid to be invisible, but competent. The bakery went silent. Mrs. Chen, who'd been in the back doing inventory, came out at the sound of the bell. She stopped short, her eyes going wide. Jessica, who was supposed to be wiping tables, just stood there with her mouth hanging open. 2 customers at the corner table stopped mid-conversation, staring. "Holy shit," Jessica said under her breath. Thomas smiled. "Good morning. We're here to see Aaliyah." Every eye in the bakery turned to her. Aaliyah felt her face go hot. Her hands were still holding a tray of croissants. She set it down carefully like she was moving through a dream. What? May we speak with you?" Thomas asked. His voice was the same but different, still gentle but with an authority she hadn't heard before. "Privately." Mrs. Chen looked between them and Aaliyah, her expression confused and a little worried. "Aaliyah, do you know these people?" Aaliyah's mind was racing. "I think so." "We'll only take a moment of her time," Eleanor said. Her voice was stronger, now steady and refined, the voice of someone used to being listened to. "We promise not to keep her long." Mrs. Chen hesitated, clearly unsure what was happening. Finally, she nodded. "Use my office." Aaliyah followed Thomas and Eleanor into the small back office, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The man in the suit stayed outside along with Mrs. Chen and Jessica, who was openly staring with her phone out like she wanted to take pictures. When the door closed, Aaliyah finally found her voice. "What's going on? Who are you people?" Thomas and Eleanor exchanged a glance. There was something in it, a question and an answer, a whole conversation without words. "The other night," Thomas began, "we weren't entirely honest with you. We weren't homeless," Eleanor said softly. "We weren't hungry." "Well, I was hungry. That part was real." Thomas insists on authenticity in these tests, and I can't fake low blood sugar. "But the rest," she trailed off, looking almost guilty. Aaliyah backed up until she hit the desk. "So you were lying. This was some kind of, what, test scam?" "A test," Thomas said firmly, "but not a scam. Please, Aaliyah, let me explain." "I don't want to hear, my wife and I," Thomas continued, his voice firm but not unkind, "are the founders of the Kensington Foundation. Have you heard of it?" Aaliyah shook her head, her mind reeling. "We're one of the largest charitable organizations on the East Coast," Eleanor said. "We focus on education, healthcare access, and poverty relief. Over the past 30 years, we've distributed more than $200 million in grants and aid." Aaliyah stared at them. The words didn't make sense. "You're You're rich. Very, Thomas said simply. Quite obscenely rich, actually. I made my fortune in tech back in the 80s and 90s before most people even knew what the internet was. Eleanor came from old money. Her family's been wealthy for generations. Together we have more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. We're also very old, Eleanor added with a slight smile. Thomas is 78, I'm 76, and we don't have children. What does this have to do with me? Aaliyah's voice came out as a whisper. Everything, Eleanor said. She moved closer, and Aaliyah could smell her perfume now, something floral and expensive. Thomas and I have been trying to figure out what to do with our foundation when we're gone. We've interviewed hundreds of potential successors, people with business degrees from Harvard, law degrees from Yale, impressive resumes full of corporate experience and nonprofit management, but none of them had what we were looking for. Which is a good heart, Thomas said. His pale blue eyes held hers. Someone who understands what it truly means to sacrifice. Someone who gives even when they have nothing to give. Someone who sees people really sees them instead of just walking past. Someone who understands poverty not as a concept to discuss in board meetings, but as a lived reality. We've been doing these tests, Eleanor continued, going to different cities, different neighborhoods, pretending to be in desperate need, seeing who helps. Most people ignored us completely. Didn't even make eye contact. Some were kind but distant. They'd give money but wouldn't look us in the eye, wouldn't actually engage with us as human beings. A few were genuinely compassionate and gave generously, but when we investigated their backgrounds, we found they were already wealthy themselves. Their kindness cost them nothing real. It was easy charity. But you, Thomas said, his voice intense now, gave us a cake you'd been saving 4 months to buy. For your mother's birthday, you gave it without hesitation. Without asking questions, without expecting anything in return. You even tried to make us comfortable, to give us coffee, to let us sit. You treated us like people, not problems to be solved. Aaliyah's throat was tight. Anger was building in her chest. So this whole thing was fake. My mother's birthday present was part of your social experiment. You let me give you something I'd been saving for months just to see if I would. I know how it sounds, Eleanor said quietly, and I know you have every right to be angry. Believe me, we've had this argument ourselves many times. The ethics of what we're doing. But please understand, we needed to know. We needed to see who people really are when they think no one important is watching. We've already verified everything about you, Thomas added. Your work history, your mother's medical situation, the fact that you've been trying to save for college for 4 years, the fact that you work 60-hour weeks and still somehow find time to be kind to strangers. The fact that every employer you've ever had has said you're the most reliable, hard-working person they've ever hired. Aaliyah felt dizzy. You investigated me. You went through my life. Standard procedure for what we're about to offer, Thomas said calmly. Which is... Thomas pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. It was thick, cream-colored, expensive. He set it on Mrs. Chen's cluttered desk with a soft thud. A full scholarship to any accredited college or university in New York State, he said. Room, board, tuition, books, everything covered. A monthly stipend of $2,000 for living expenses and anything else you need. Laptop, phone, whatever helps you succeed. Eleanor pulled out a second envelope. Complete coverage of your mother's medical expenses, dialysis appointments, hospital stays, medications, specialist consultations, and, most importantly, when a kidney becomes available, the transplant surgery and all follow-up care. Aaliyah couldn't breathe. The words were hitting her like physical blows. What? We want to help you, Eleanor said gently, not as charity, but as an investment in the kind of person who should be running our foundation someday, someone who understands what poverty really means, what sacrifice really means, what kindness really costs when you have nothing to spare. This is insane, Aaliyah said. Her voice was shaking. You can't give me all that because I gave you a cake. That's crazy. It wasn't just a cake, Thomas said firmly. He stepped closer, and she could see the intensity in his eyes. It was 4 months of your life, 4 months of choosing to walk instead of taking the bus, of skipping meals, of saving every spare coin. It was your mother's birthday, the one thing you'd been planning, hoping for, and you gave it up in an instant for someone you'd never met, for someone who probably looked like a lost cause. We've been searching for 3 years, Eleanor added. Her voice was soft but serious. 3 years of tests in different cities, 3 years of interviews and background checks and investigations. We've given this test to hundreds of people. You're the first person who passed, the first person who gave from a place of genuine empathy and real sacrifice." Aaliyah looked at the envelopes on the desk. They were just paper, but they felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. "I don't understand. What do you want from me? There has to be a catch. There's always a catch." "Nothing right now," Thomas said. "Go to school. Study whatever you're passionate about. Focus on your education. Take care of your mother. In a few years, when you graduate, we'd like you to consider joining the foundation, working with us, learning how we operate, and eventually, when we're gone, taking over as director. But there's no obligation," Eleanor said quickly. "This isn't a contract. If you finish school and decide you want to do something else entirely, that's fine. The scholarship and your mother's medical care, those are gifts. Unconditional. No strings attached." "We're not buying you," Thomas said. "We're investing in you. There's a difference." Aaliyah's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, trying to focus. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me? I'm nobody. I'm just a girl who works in a bakery. I didn't even finish high school on time because I had to work. I'm not smart or special or—" "You're wrong," Eleanor interrupted gently. "In a world where most people only think about themselves, you thought about someone else first. You saw a stranger in desperate need, and you didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate costs and benefits. You didn't wonder if we deserved it. You just helped. That's rare, Aaliyah. Rarer than you could possibly imagine. Most people with money," Thomas added, "have never known real poverty. They donate from a distance. They write checks to feel good or because it looks good on their tax returns. They volunteer at soup kitchens for a few hours and then go home to their warm houses. But you gave from a place of genuine empathy because you know what it's like to be desperate. You understand in your bones what it means to need help and not know where it's going to come from." Aaliyah sank into the chair behind the desk. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Her mind was spinning. College. Real college. Not community college where she'd have to work full-time and study part-time and graduate in 6 years maybe. Real college with dorms and meal plans and time to actually focus on learning. No more scraping together dollars. No more 60-hour weeks that left her so exhausted she could barely think. No more lying awake at night calculating how to make $50 last 2 weeks. And her mother. Her mother could get real medical care. Not the free clinic where they rushed you through in 10 minutes. Not the emergency room that sent bills she couldn't pay. Real doctors. Real treatment. A chance at a transplant. "I need time," she said finally. Her voice sounded far away. "I need to think. I need to talk to my mom." "Of course," Thomas said. He pushed the envelopes toward her across the desk. "Read through everything. Talk to your mother. Take all the time you need. Our contact information is inside along with letters from the Foundation's board of directors, our lawyers. Everything you need to verify this is legitimate." Eleanor squeezed Aaliyah's hand once more before letting go. Her grip was firm now, not weak like it had been that night. "You changed our lives the other night, Aaliyah. You reminded us why we started this foundation in the first place. Too many years in boardrooms and fundraising galas had made us forget. You brought us back to earth, back to what matters." "We'd like to return the favor," Thomas added. They left quietly, the man in the suit holding the door for them. Through the window, Aaliyah could see a black car waiting expensive sleek with tinted windows. She sat alone in Mrs. Chen's office, staring at the envelopes. From outside, she could hear Jessica's excited voice, high-pitched and insistent. "Oh my God, who were those people? Aaliyah, Aaliyah! Are you in there? What the hell just happened? Was that a limo? Oh my God, I'm dying. You have to tell me everything." But Aaliyah couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely think. Her hands shook as she opened the first envelope. Inside was a letter on official foundation letterhead, thick, expensive paper, the foundation's seal embossed at the top. Legal language, but clear, outlining everything Thomas had said. Full scholarship to any accredited institution, monthly stipend, medical coverage for Linda Carter, including dialysis medication and transplant surgery when available, a potential position after graduation, but no obligation. The second envelope contained a check. Aaliyah looked at the number, blinked, looked again. $50,000, made out to Aaliyah Carter. For immediate expenses and peace of mind, read the note attached to it in Eleanor's handwriting. Your mother's next dialysis appointment is covered. So is the next one. And everyone after that for as long as she needs. You'll never have to choose between her health and your future again. You're free now. Use this freedom wisely." Aaliyah pressed both hands over her mouth. A sound came out half sob, half laugh, completely involuntary. $50,000. She'd never seen that much money in her life. Hadn't even imagined it outside of abstract dreams. The door opened. Mrs. Chen poked her head in her face, concerned. "Aaliyah, honey, are you okay? Should I call someone?" Aaliyah looked up at her. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Actually smiling. "I'm okay," she said. Her voice was shaking. I think I'm more than okay." Mrs. Chen came in and closed the door behind her. "What's going on? Who are those people?" They want to send me to college and pay for my mom's treatment. And Aaliyah couldn't finish. It was too big, too impossible. Mrs. Chen's eyes went wide. "What?" "I gave them a cake," Aaliyah said, and started laughing through her tears. "I gave them a $25 cake, and they're giving me my whole life back." Mrs. Chen sat down heavily in the other chair. "Start from the beginning." So Aaliyah did. She told her everything about Thomas and Eleanor appearing that rainy night, desperate and wet, about Eleanor nearly collapsing, about the decision to give them the cake she'd saved for months, about the basket that had appeared at her door, and now this. When she finished, Mrs. Chen was crying too. "Oh, honey," she said. "Oh, my sweet girl, you deserve this. You deserve all of this and more." "Do I, though?" Aaliyah asked. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "You did what you would do. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have followed Jessica's lead and turned them away. You're special, Aaliyah. I've always known that." Aaliyah looked at the check again. The numbers didn't seem real. "What do I do?" she asked. "You cash that check," Mrs. Chen said. "You call your mother, and then you start living the life you were always meant to live." 3.5 years later. Aaliyah Carter stood in front of her bathroom mirror in her small but comfortable apartment, the one with real windows and enough space for all her mother's medical equipment, and then some, adjusting her cap and gown. The royal blue fabric felt strange, too nice, too official. She'd spent so many years in worn work clothes and uniforms with name tags and whatever was cheap and clean, that this formal academic regalia felt like a costume. But it wasn't a costume, it was real. She was graduating from the University of Rochester with a Bachelor of Arts in Social Work, summa cum laude, a 3.9 GPA, Dean's List every semester. A year ago, she wouldn't have believed it. 3 years ago, it had seemed like an impossible dream. "Aaliyah," her mother called from the living room. "We need to leave in 10 minutes. You know how parking is going to be coming." Aaliyah took one last look at herself in the mirror. The tassel on her cap hung to the right. Soon it would be moved to the left, the symbolic gesture that marked the transition from student to graduate. She touched the tassel gently, still not quite believing this was real. In the living room, Linda Carter sat in her wheelchair, beaming with pride so obvious it radiated from her like light. The kidney transplant 6 months ago had been successful. The match had come through faster than anyone expected, and the surgery had gone perfectly. She still wasn't strong enough to walk long distances, still needed the wheelchair for anything more than short trips around the apartment, but the color had returned to her face. Her eyes were clear and bright. She looked more like herself than she had in years. More importantly, she looked like she had a future. "My college graduate," Linda said, her eyes shining with tears she wasn't even trying to hide. "Come here, baby. Let me look at you." Aaliyah knelt beside the wheelchair, and her mother cupped her face with both hands. Hands that were stronger, now steadier, warmer. "I'm so proud of you," Linda whispered. "So incredibly proud. Your father would be too." "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. Without your support." "You could have," Linda said firmly. "You're the strongest person I know. But I'm glad you didn't have to. I'm glad we got to do this together." "Thomas and Eleanor are meeting us there, right?" Aaliyah asked. "Yes, they texted this morning. They insist on sitting with me during the ceremony." Over the past 3.5 years, Thomas and Eleanor Kensington had become something like family. They'd visited monthly, always interested in Aaliyah's progress, always supportive, but never pushy. They'd celebrated when she made Dean's List her first semester. They'd sent flowers and sat in the waiting room during Linda's transplant surgery. They'd helped Aaliyah find this apartment when it became clear the basement wasn't suitable for Linda's recovery. They'd been there for every important moment, steady and kind, and genuinely invested in her success. "They're good people," Linda said softly. "Strange way of finding you, but good people." Aaliyah laughed. Yeah, they are. The graduation ceremony was held at the university's main auditorium, a beautiful building with high ceilings and excellent acoustics. The place was packed with families, all of them dressed up, all of them proud. The air buzzed with excitement and the occasional baby crying and the rustle of programs and the click of cameras. Aaliyah sat with her fellow graduates in the front section, organized alphabetically. When her name was called Aaliyah Marie Carter Bachelor of Arts in Social Work, summa cum laude, she heard her mother's voice above everyone else shouting with pure joy. She heard Thomas and Eleanor, too, applauding loudly, standing up in their seats. Walking across that stage, shaking hands with the dean, accepting her diploma, it felt surreal, like she was watching it happen to someone else. But the weight of the diploma in her hands was real. The tassel she moved from right to left was real. The life she'd built was real. Afterward, they all went to dinner at Tornadoes, a French restaurant Aaliyah would never have been able to afford on her own. Eleanor had made reservations weeks ago. They sat at a round table. Aaliyah, Linda, in her wheelchair, pulled up to the table Thomas and Eleanor. The restaurant was beautiful with white tablecloths and real flowers and waiters who moved like dancers. So, Thomas said, cutting into his steak after the toast to Aaliyah's achievement, have you thought about our offer? Aaliyah had known this was coming. Thomas and Eleanor had mentioned it several times over the past year, the position at the Kensington Foundation, Assistant Director of Community Outreach. A real job with a real salary, helping people the way she'd been helped. Helping people the way she'd helped that rainy night 3.5 years ago. I have, Aaliyah said carefully. She set down her fork and took a breath. And I want to do it. I want to work with the foundation. Eleanor's face lit up. Oh, Aaliyah, that's wonderful. But, Aaliyah continued, I have a condition. A request, I guess. Thomas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh, tell us. I want to start a bakery. Silence. Thomas and Eleanor exchanged glances. Linda was smiling like she already knew where this was going. A bakery. Thomas repeated slowly. A community bakery. Aaliyah clarified. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Like Sweet Haven, but bigger, better. A place where people can get good quality food at prices they can actually afford. Fresh bread, real meals, decent coffee. Not food bank stuff that's expired or canned. Real food that treats people with dignity. Go on, Eleanor said, her eyes sharp and interested. Once a week, we do a free meal night. Aaliyah continued. Anyone can come. No questions asked. No income verification. No hoops to jump through. Homeless, working poor families struggling to make ends meet. Students, elderly people on fixed incomes, anyone. We serve them a real meal. We give them a place to sit that's warm and clean. We treat them like customers, not charity cases. Sweet Haven closed, Thomas said. It wasn't a question he knew. They'd been keeping close tabs on Aaliyah's life. Mrs. Chen couldn't afford to keep it open, Aaliyah confirmed. Rising rent competition from chains, not enough customers willing to pay what real baked goods cost. But I kept thinking about how many people that place helped. How many students studied there because it was warm and they could nurse a coffee for hours. How many elderly people came in just to talk to someone. How many kids came after school because it was safe and Mrs. Chen always had day-old cookies she'd give them for free. And you want the foundation to fund this? Thomas asked. As my first project, yeah, I'll manage it. I'll work there. But I want it to be a real business, not just a charity operation. We charge fair prices, we hire locally, we source from community farms and suppliers when we can. We pay living wages to our employees. But we also remember that sometimes people just need kindness more than they need another lecture about budgeting. Eleanor was smiling now, really smiling. You've thought about this. For 3 years, Aaliyah admitted. Ever since I started school, I've taken business classes, nonprofit management, social work courses. I've been building a business plan. I have projections, supplier contacts, location ideas, everything. Thomas and Eleanor looked at each other again. Another one of those silent conversations. When can you start? Eleanor asked. Aaliyah blinked. What? When can you start? Thomas repeated. We love it. It's perfect. It's exactly the kind of project we need. Dignified aid, community-focused, sustainable business model with a social mission. When can you start? You're serious. Completely, Eleanor said. We'll fund it fully. You put together your final proposal, we'll review it with our board, and we'll get you started. 6 months, a year. Aaliyah felt tears prick her eyes. I can have a proposal ready in a month. Then we'll look at locations in 2 months, Thomas said. He raised his wine glass. to the new Sweet Haven Community Bakery. May it feed both bodies and spirits. They clinked glasses. Linda was openly crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she said for the 100th time that day. Aaliyah looked around the table at her little family, the mother who'd always believed in her, and the couple who'd given her a chance when she'd needed it most. 3.5 years ago, she'd been a girl with no future, working herself to death for pennies, watching her mother die slowly. Now she was a college graduate with a real job and a real future and a chance to help people the way she'd been helped, all because of a $25 cake. 18 months later, the new Sweet Haven Community Bakery stood on a corner lot in downtown Rochester, just 3 blocks from where the original had been. The space was twice the size, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in natural light and made the place feel open and welcoming. Tables where people could sit for hours if they needed to. A community bulletin board where people could post job openings, housing leads resources, free Wi-Fi. Outlets at every table for people who needed to charge phones or work on laptops. Aaliyah unlocked the door at 6 a.m. like she did every morning. She'd hired 4 full-time employees and 2 part-time, all people who'd struggled to find work elsewhere. Single mothers who needed flexible schedules, ex-offenders trying to rebuild their lives, immigrants still learning English, people who'd been written off by other employers. Marcus, a formerly homeless veteran, was already inside, having arrived early to start the first batch of bread. He looked up when Aaliyah came in. "Morning, boss." "Morning, Marcus. How'd the sourdough turn out?" "See for yourself." He showed her the loaves rising in their baskets. Perfect bubbles, good structure. Marcus had taken to baking like he'd been born for it. "Beautiful," Aaliyah said. "You're an artist." "Learned from the best," he said with a small smile. The morning rush started at 7, students grabbing coffee on their way to class at the university. Construction workers buying breakfast sandwiches that were actually filling. Office workers treating themselves to fresh pastries that didn't come from a grocery store freezer. They priced everything fairly, not cheap, but reasonable. Good food at honest prices. They made a small profit on most items, enough to cover costs and pay their employees living wages. At noon, a young woman came in. She couldn't have been more than 19, maybe 20. She wore a coat that looked too thin for January, and she kept her hands shoved deep in her pockets. She approached the counter hesitantly, her eyes darting around like she was expecting someone to yell at her. "Hi," she said quietly. Do you have any day-old bread I could buy? Something cheap." Aaliyah studied her, saw the nervousness, the hunger barely hidden, the pride fighting with desperation. She'd seen that look in the mirror for years. "We don't sell day-old bread," Aaliyah said. The girl's face fell. Her shoulders slumped. "Oh, okay. Sorry to bother you." She turned to leave. "But," Aaliyah continued, "we do have a special today. Buy 1 sandwich, get a second free, plus a cookie and a coffee." The girl turned back slowly, hope and suspicion fighting in her expression. "How much for 1 sandwich?" $5. The girl bit her lip. She pulled out a small change purse and counted carefully. I only have $3.50. Aaliyah smiled. "You know what? It's your lucky day. We're running a promotion. $3.50 gets you everything I mentioned." "Really?" The girl's voice cracked. "Really? What kind of sandwiches do you like?" "Anything. I'm not picky." "Anything." Aaliyah made her 2 turkey and cheese sandwiches with extra meat, added a chocolate chip cookie, poured the largest coffee they had, and added cream and sugar packets on the side. "Thank you," the girl whispered as Aaliyah handed over the bag. "You have no idea how much this helps." "I think I do," Aaliyah said gently. The girl left with her food, walking carefully like she was carrying treasure. Marcus appeared beside Aaliyah at the counter. "That was nice of you, boss. You're going to lose money if you keep doing that, though." "We're breaking even," Aaliyah said. "That's enough." "Not everyone remembers what it's like when they get to the other side." Aaliyah glanced at the framed photo hanging behind the counter. It showed her Thomas and Eleanor at the bakery's grand opening 6 months ago. Thomas had his arm around her shoulders. Eleanor was holding a cake, a chocolate and vanilla mousse with a sugar rose on top, exactly like the one from that night. Mrs. Chen was in the photo too, beaming with pride. She'd been their first hire, brought on as head baker and advisor. "You saved me," Aaliyah had told her when she'd made the offer. "Let me return the favor." "Some people never let you forget," Aaliyah said softly to Marcus. At 3 p.m. during the afternoon lull, the door chimed again. An elderly couple walked in. The man was supporting his wife, who looked weak and unsteady. They were dressed simply but cleanly. Not wealthy, but not obviously desperate either. Something about them made Aaliyah pause. Not because they looked like Thomas and Eleanor, they didn't, but because of the way the man held his wife. The same protectiveness, the same desperate love. "Can I help you?" Aaliyah asked, coming around the counter. The man looked embarrassed. "Do you have anything inexpensive? My wife is diabetic and she hasn't eaten today. We're waiting for her medication to be covered by insurance, but there's been some kind of delay with the paperwork. And we thought it would just be a few days, but it's been 2 weeks now, and—" "Say no more," Aaliyah said. She went to the display and grabbed 2 of the best sandwiches they had, added 2 bottles of juice and 2 chocolate chip cookies. She put them in a bag and handed it over. "On the house." "We can't accept." "You can and you will," she smiled. "Take care of each other." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Bless you," she whispered. "No," Aaliyah said. "Bless you for taking care of each other. That's what matters." After they left, Marcus appeared beside her again. "You know you're going to go broke doing this, right?" "No," Aaliyah said, watching through the window as the man carefully unwrapped a sandwich for his wife. "I won't." "How do you figure?" "Because I'm not in this to get rich. I'm in this to pay forward what was given to me." She thought about Thomas and Eleanor, about the cake, about the choice that had changed everything. Someone once told me that the most expensive things in life don't cost money. I'm investing in something more valuable than profit, which is the kind of world I want to live in. That evening, after closing, Aaliyah sat in her small office and looked over the books. They were breaking even barely. The free meals on Thursday nights cost more than she'd anticipated, but somehow it was working. Donations from customers who knew what they were doing helped. Grants from the foundation helped. Small profits on their regular sales helped. They were making it work. Her phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. "Thomas and I are in town tomorrow. Lunch." Aaliyah smiled and texted back. "Come to the bakery. I'll make you something special." The next day, when Thomas and Eleanor arrived, Aaliyah had a surprise waiting. A small chocolate and vanilla mousse cake with a sugar rose on top sitting on the counter. Eleanor's hand went to her heart. "Aaliyah, I never got to properly thank you," Aaliyah said, "for seeing something in me I didn't see in myself." Thomas shook his head, but he was smiling. "We just gave you an opportunity. You did the rest." "No," Aaliyah said firmly, "you gave me more than that. You gave me hope. You showed me that one small act of kindness can change everything. And now I get to pass that forward every single day." They ate the cake together at one of the window tables, sharing stories about the foundation's latest projects and Aaliyah's plans to expand the free meal nights to twice a week. When they were leaving, Thomas paused at the door. His expression was serious. "You know," he said, "Eleanor and I are getting older, almost 80 and 78 now. We've been thinking about stepping back from the day-to-day operations of the foundation. We'll need someone to take over fully within the next few years." "I know," Aaliyah said. "Are you ready for that?" Aaliyah looked around her bakery, at the tables where people from all walks of life sat together, at the wall where she'd hung photos of every employee along with their story, single mother, veteran, immigrant, recovering addict, each one valued, at the quote she'd painted above the counter in careful letters, "Some things only truly become ours when we give them away." At the customers coming in, some who could pay, some who couldn't, all of them treated with the same dignity. "Yeah," she said, "I think I am." Thomas smiled. "Good, because Eleanor and I didn't build this foundation to create another corporation. We built it to create a legacy of compassion, to prove that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength, to show that seeing people's humanity, really seeing it, is the most important skill anyone can have. And you," Eleanor added, taking Aaliyah's hand, "you understand that in a way most people never will, because you've lived it. You know what it means to need help. You know what it means to be invisible. You know what it means when someone finally sees you." After they left, Aaliyah stood alone in her bakery. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, making everything warm and golden. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. The sound of the espresso machine conversation laughter. She thought about the girl she'd been 3.5 years ago, working herself to death for poverty wages, watching her mother die slowly, saving for months just to afford one small cake, making an impossible choice on a rainy December night. At the time, giving away that cake had felt like losing something, like sacrificing the one good thing she'd been able to do for her mother. Now she understood it had been the moment she'd found everything. Not the money, though, that had helped. Not the scholarship or the medical care or the job, though all of those had mattered. She'd found herself, found her purpose, found the exact shape her life was supposed to take. A customer came in, interrupting her thoughts. A mother with 2 small children counting coins from her pocket carefully. "Hi," the woman said, her voice tired and worried. "How much for your cheapest sandwich?" Aaliyah smiled. The same smile she'd given 100 times before. The same smile she'd give 1,000 times more. "Tell you what," she said, "today we're running a special." As she prepared food for the family, adding extra without being asked, adding a juice box for each child and a cookie, she caught her reflection in the glass display case. She was smiling, really genuinely smiling, the kind of smile that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're meant to do with your life. Outside, snow had started to fall. December in Rochester, the same month that had changed her life. The same month she'd made a choice that had seemed impossibly hard at the time. Aaliyah watched the snowflakes drift past the window and thought about a cake, about 2 strangers, about the strange and wonderful way the universe sometimes repays kindness. Not always immediately, not always obviously, but always, always in ways that matter more than you could ever imagine. Behind her, the bakery filled with the sound of conversation and laughter, the smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee, the warmth of people taking care of each other one small act at a time. And in that moment, standing in the bakery she'd built from nothing but hope and hard work, and the lesson 2 strangers had taught her on a cold winter night 3.5 years ago, Aaliyah Carter knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do, being exactly who she was supposed to be. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ended with, and then she spent the rest of her life helping others find their happily ever after too, which when you think about it, is the best kind of ending there is.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.